Hello children, how are you? I hope all of you have seen the first part of Toba Take Sing, and this is the final part of Toba Take Sing. Last class we have gone through an introduction about the author and also about the text, and we have gently moved into the text. So we saw conversations between the inmates of asylum, and they were really confused what is the issue of Pakistan, Hindustan, and why all these turmoils are happening in both countries, Pakistan and India, and they don't know about the situation and why they are carried into different places. They don't know. And so today we will gently move into the text, and we will meet several different characters now, and we are going to meet the major character Singh here. So let's move into the slides. Yes children, please take page number 19, second paragraph. For one lunatic, the entire issue of Hindustan-Pakistan and Pakistan-Hindustan rigmarole resulted in further disorientation. For one person, all these turmoil, all these confused state of Hindustan-Pakistan, and resulted in another confusing state, another bewildered state. He was disoriented. He was in a confused state. And one day, while he was sweeping the floor, he suddenly suspended his task. He suddenly stopped sweeping and climbed onto a tree, where he remained for nearly 2 hours. He climbed into the tree and he remained for 2 hours there. And during that time, he lectured extensively and non-stop on the matter of Pakistan versus Hindustan. He's a mad person, so we don't know what actually was his words. He may be just talking about all the things that he knew, but he doesn't know anything about the correct matters of Pakistan and Hindustan. When ordered by the guards to come down, he climbed higher still. When threatened with force, he said, "I want to live neither in Pakistan nor in Hindustan. I live on this tree." He doesn't want to go even to Pakistan or Hindustan. He's happy where he is. And he don't know actually where he belongs, either to Pakistan or Hindustan. He don't know. He doesn't know. And he's saying, and he's happy in asylum, or he's okay with the asylum. I live here. Or tree can be symbolic to the asylum itself. I live on this tree. I live in the asylum. I'm okay here. And he descended from the tree when his fever cooled somewhat, and embracing his Hindu and Sikh friends, he cried bitterly. He was heartbroken. Why? Because he doesn't want to leave his place. He was saddened by the thought of their impending departure to India. He doesn't want to go to India. He just wants to live where he belongs, in the asylum, or in the place where he born and brought up. That is Lahore or Pakistan, or that place. One morning, a Muslim engineer who used to spend most of his time walking back and forth in a particular part of the garden. So he's also another insane person. A Muslim engineer walking back and forth in a particular part of the garden suddenly took off his clothes and began running about naked. A fat Muslim from Chiniad, that is another city in the province of Punjab, Pakistan, who had once been an active member of the Muslim League, so he was an active member before, and who bathed at least 15 times during the day and suddenly gave up bathing altogether. Suddenly he has gone insane. And his name was Muhammad Ali. And one day he announced that he was Quaid-e-Azam, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And one day he announced he was Quaid-e-Azam and he was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And following his example, a Sikh in his enclosure announced that another person, so this is happening inside the asylum, okay? He announced he was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Then another Sikh who saw this announced that he was Master Tara Singh. Blood would have been spilled. There was a chance of a quarrel, but luckily both men were declared to be dangerous and they were confined to separate quarters. Both the persons of fat Muslim and also the Sikh person, both were confined to separate quarters. And now let's look into who is Master Tara Singh. Master Tara Singh is a person who first opposed partition, is a major figure from Punjab. First, he opposed partition, and later he guided his people through this painful process of partition when it was necessary, when it became inevitable. And he was a fearless leader and he was a teacher. That's why he was called Master Tara Singh. And he was also a founder of the Shiromani Gurudwara Prabandha Committee (SGPC), and that is a body that controls the Sikh Gurudwaras and was also important in the creation of Akali Dal, which is a party, which is a political party in Punjab. And he took its efforts to protect the Sikh community, and he had a major role in the creation of the linguistic state, that is Punjabi, uh, in 1960. That was speaking Punjabi belonged to a state Punjab, and he had a major role in the creation of the linguistic state of Punjab in the 1960s. And now we are moving on to the next paragraph. There was a lawyer in the asylum, a young man from Lahore who had lost his sanity over a tragic love affair. A lawyer in the asylum lost his sanity over a tragic love affair. എന്തായിരിക്കാം റീസൺ? ആ പെൺകുട്ടി എന്തെങ്കിലും വലിയ കാരണവശാൽ വേണ്ടാന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ടാവാം അല്ലേ? ആളുടെ സെൻസിൽ നിന്ന് തന്നെ പോയി ഒരു ലവ് അഫെയറിൽ. He loved a girl, but when partition came, Amritsar became the part of India, and his beloved was in Amritsar in India, and he was in Lahore, Pakistan. അപ്പോൾ രണ്ടുപേരും രണ്ട് രാജ്യത്തായി. ബോയ് പാകിസ്ഥാനിലും ഗേൾ അമൃത്സറിലുമായി. He was deeply grieved when he discovered that Amritsar had become part of India, because the girl he had been in love with was from there, and she had rejected this young lawyer. വെറുതെ നമ്മൾ റിജക്റ്റഡ് എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ ഡോണ്ട് തിങ്ക് ദാറ്റ് ഇപ്പോൾ പറയാറില്ലേ തേച്ചു എന്ന് പറയുന്ന രീതിയിൽ, അങ്ങനെ അല്ല. ആ സമയത്ത് എങ്ങനെയാണ്? ആ സമയത്ത് ഭയങ്കര പ്രശ്നങ്ങൾ നടക്കുന്ന സമയമാണ്, ഫുൾ പ്രോബ്ലംസ് ആണ്. പാർട്ടിഷൻ്റെ പേരിൽ അങ്ങോട്ടും ഇങ്ങോട്ടും ആൾക്കാർ കൊന്നൊടുക്കുന്ന സമയമാണ് അല്ലേ? ആ സമയത്തുള്ള കഥയാണ്. അല്ലാണ്ട് ഇപ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ ജസ്റ്റ് ചുമ്മാ തേച്ചു എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിൽ ഇത് പറഞ്ഞു പോകാനും പറ്റില്ല. ആ കുട്ടിക്ക് അവരുടേതായിട്ടുള്ള ഒരുപാട് പ്രോബ്ലംസും ഉണ്ടാവും. This is a story, okay? Because the girl he had been in love with was from there. She had rejected this young lawyer, but despite his mental state, he still cared for her. എവിടെയോ അയാൾ ബോധം നഷ്ടപ്പെട്ടിരുന്നെങ്കിലും ആ ഒരു ഓർമ്മ ആളിലുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. And he cursed all the leaders, both Muslim leaders and Hindu, who were responsible for splitting Hindustan in two, who were responsible for splitting Hindustan in two, who were responsible for splitting the lovers too. His beloved had become a Hindustani while he was now a Pakistani. He was from Pakistan. Some of the other inmates tried to comfort the lawyer. Potada, Sarillada. They told him he would be sent to Pakistan, where his beloved lived. But he did not wish to leave Lahore. He doesn't want to leave Lahore. For he felt that his practice would not thrive in Amritsar. ആൾ ലോയറാന്നല്ലേ പറഞ്ഞത്. അപ്പോൾ ആളുടെ പ്രാക്ടീസ്, ആളുടെ ഇത് അമൃത്സറിൽ ഫ്ലറിഷ് ചെയ്യില്ല എന്നാണ് പറയുന്നത്. ബട്ട് വി ഡോണ്ട് നോ ആക്ച്വലി. ആൾ ഇൻസെയിൻ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ആളാണ്. പിന്നെ എങ്ങനെയാണ് അവിടെ പ്രാക്ടീസ് ചെയ്യുന്ന കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ. മേ ബി ദിസ് ഇസ് നോട്ട് എ ലൈഫ് ലോങ് ഡിസീസ്. ആ ഒരു ഡിപ്രഷൻ സ്റ്റേറ്റിൽ നിന്ന് പുറത്ത് വന്ന് നല്ലതായിട്ട് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ കോൺഷ്യസോടെ ജീവിക്കുന്ന ഒരുപാട് പേരുണ്ട്. Then, in the European ward were two Anglo-Indians. അപ്പോൾ ലോയറിൻ്റെ കാര്യം പറഞ്ഞു, മറ്റേ ഫാറ്റ് മുസ്ലിമിൻ്റെ കാര്യം പറഞ്ഞു, പിന്നെ ഒരു സിഖിൻ്റെ കാര്യം പറഞ്ഞു, ദാറ്റ് ഹു അനൗൺസ്ഡ് ഹിംസെൽഫ് ആസ് മാസ്റ്റർ താര സിംഗ്. And now we are going to speak about in the European ward were two Anglo-Indians. When they heard that the English had given Hindustan freedom and then left, they were devastated. Why? അതിൻ്റെ റീസണാണ് ഇനി പറയാൻ പോകുന്നത്. ഇൻ ദ കോഴ്സ് ഓഫ് സെവറൽ സീക്രട്ട് മീറ്റിംഗ്സ് ദ ഡിസ്കസ് ദ ഫ്യൂച്ചർ ഓഫ് ദ സ്റ്റേറ്റസ് ഇൻ അസൈലം. അവരുടെ കാര്യം എന്താവുമെന്ന് അവർക്ക് അറിയണ്ടായിരുന്നില്ല. ആൻഡ് ദേ വെയർ ഇൻ സീക്രട്ട് മീറ്റിംഗ്സ്. വുഡ് ദ യൂറോപ്യൻ വാട്ട് ബി റീറ്റെയിൻഡ്? യൂറോപ്യൻസിന് അവിടെ തന്നെ നിൽക്കാൻ പെർമിഷൻ ഉണ്ടാവോ ഇല്ലയോ? വുഡ് ദേ കണ്ടിന്യൂ ടു ഗെറ്റ് ബ്രേക്ക്ഫാസ്റ്റ്? അവർക്ക് ബ്രേക്ക്ഫാസ്റ്റ് കിട്ടുമോ? വാട്ട് ബ്രേക്ക്ഫാസ്റ്റ്? Or would they be forced to eat bloody Indian chapati instead of bread? Worried if they would get Indian breakfast or English breakfast. And these Anglo-Indians were devastated. And അവർക്ക് ഭയങ്കരമായിട്ടും ടെൻഷൻ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. അവർക്ക് ആ ഒരു വാർഡ് റീറ്റെയിൻ ചെയ്യുമോ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അവരെ ഇന്ത്യയിലോട്ട് ഫോഴ്സ് പറഞ്ഞു വിടുമോ, അങ്ങനെയുള്ള പല ട്രോമാറ്റിക് ഫീലിങ്സും അവർക്കുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ഈ ഒരു ട്രോമ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ആ സമയത്ത് എല്ലാവരും, ആ സമയത്ത് ബോർഡറിലുണ്ടായിരുന്ന ഒരുപാട് പേര് കടന്നുപോയതാണ്. ഒരുപാട് പേരെന്ന് ചുമ്മാ നമുക്ക് പറയാനും പറ്റില്ല. ഇറ്റ് വാസ് ദ പാർട്ടീഷൻ ഓഫ് മില്യൺസ് അല്ലേ? ആൾക്കാരെയാണ് ശരിക്കും പറഞ്ഞ ഡിവൈഡ് ചെയ്തത്. ലാൻഡിനെയാണ് കീറി മുറിച്ചതെങ്കിലും ആൾക്കാരാണ് ഡിവൈഡായി പോയത്. A Sikh who had been in the asylum for 15 years used to mutter constantly to himself. Yeah, now the author is introducing as Bishan Singh. A Sikh who had been in asylum for 15 years used to mutter constantly to himself. Upar di gargar di next di bay dhania di mung di dal di of lalthian. He kept saying over and over again. എന്തെങ്കിലും മനസ്സിലായോ? ഒന്നും മനസ്സിലായില്ല. മനസ്സിലാവാത്ത രീതിയിലാണ് ആളുടെ കൺസ്ട്രക്ഷൻ ഓഫ് വേർഡ്സ്. അപ്പം നമ്മൾ ഇൻട്രൊഡക്ടറി പാർട്ടിൽ അത് കണ്ടതാണ്. ഈ ഒരു ലാക്ക് ഓഫ് ക്ലാരിറ്റി ഓഫ് ഹിസ് സ്പീച്ച്, നോൺസെൻസ് ഫ്രേസ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഇൻഡിക്കേറ്റ്സ് ദ ലാക്ക് ഓഫ് ക്ലാരിറ്റി ഓഫ് ഒബ്സ്ക്യൂരിറ്റി ഓഫ് ഗവൺമെൻറ് ഒഫീഷ്യൽസ്. He slept neither at night nor during the day. According to the guards, he had not slept at all in 15 years. He did not lie down either. Sometimes he leaned against a wall. His feet and ankles were swollen from standing too much. But in spite of the bodily discomfort he experienced, he refused to rest. With great seriousness, he listened to all the talk about the matter of partition, about the matter of Hindustan, Pakistan, then assumed a solemn air and replied, Upar di gargar di next di Beidhania di Mungdal di of the Pakistan government. His usual gibberish. Really, we cannot understand what he is saying, right? Yeah, it again symbolizes the lack of clarity of government policies, of lack of clarity of partition between India, partition of Hindustan into India and Pakistan. Later on, of the Pakistan government was replaced by of the Toba Singh government. That means his gibberish, his nonsense phrase, nonsense sentence, nonsense mutterings. Upar di gargar di next di be dania di mungdal di of the Toba Singh government. He began to say like that. He began asking people where Toba Singh was. The city, you remember the city and capital of Toba Singh district in the Pakistani province. And he began asking people where his hometown was. But no one could answer that question for him. ആർക്കും അറിയണ്ടായിരുന്നില്ല. And if someone did make an attempt to figure out the present status of Toba Singh, more confusion would follow because they don't know about the status of this town, whether it belongs to India or whether it belongs to Pakistan. It had been rumored that Sialkot, which was once in Hindustan, was now in Pakistan. Who could say where Lahore, which was in Pakistan today, would be tomorrow? And was there anyone who could guarantee that both Pakistan and Hindustan would not disappear someday? So here Bishan Singh gets irritated. He mutters or shouts a mix of Punjabi, Urdu and English, which though nonsensical, but actually here he is disapproving the partition through his words. And throughout the story, we can see from now onwards, the story is going to focus on Bishan Singh. And he listened to the matter of partition, matter of Hindustan, Pakistan from his inmates, and he muttered his nonsense speech. And the madness in the asylum, their thoughts or mad talks depicts the mad acts of sane people outside the asylum. So who is sane now? Mad acts of the sane people. പുറമേ ഉള്ള ബോധത്തോടുകൂടി ഇരിക്കുന്ന ആൾക്കാരുടെ ബോധമില്ലാത്ത പ്രവൃത്തികളാണ് ശരിക്കും നമ്മൾക്ക് കാണിച്ചു തരുന്നത് ഓഥർ. മാഡ്നസ് ഇൻ ദി അസൈലം, ആക്ച്വൽ മാഡ്നസ് ഇസ് ദി മാഡ് ആക്ട്സ് ഓഫ് ദി സെയിൻ പീപ്പിൾ. അതാണ് ശരിക്കും ബോധത്തോടെ ഇരിക്കുന്ന ആൾക്കാർ ബോധമില്ലാത്ത കാര്യങ്ങൾ ചെയ്യുമ്പോഴാണ് എന്താ പറയുക മാഡ്നസ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു സിറ്റുവേഷൻ വരുന്നത്. And now, next paragraph. This man's cash had become thin, that is hair. Bishan Singh's hair became thin and straggly, that is growing in untidy way, because he never bathed. He seldom bathed. And his cash and his beard had become glued together, giving him a ghoulish appearance. ഒരു evil spirit പോലത്തെ ഒരു appearance ആയിരുന്നു ആൾക്ക്. But he was a harmless man. He doesn't attack people. He was harmless man even though he was mad. In 15 years, he had not once been involved in a brawl or a noisy quarrel. He was a harmless man. He was a quiet man. The guards only knew that he was from Toba Singh, the city, where he owned land. Yeah, he was a landowner too. He had been a well-to-do landowner. Then without warning, he had gone ഇൻസെയിൻ. ആളുടെ ഇൻസെയിൻ ആയിട്ടുള്ളതിൻ്റെ റീസൺ എന്താണെന്ന് അറിയില്ല. പെട്ടെന്നൊരു ദിവസമാണ് ആൾക്ക് ആളുടെ ബോധം നഷ്ടപ്പെടുന്നത്. His relatives had bound him with iron chains, brought him to the asylum and admitted him. And he got admitted in the asylum. And they visited him once every month. They visited, the relatives visited, inquired after his well-being and then left. Their visits continued until the disturbances began. അപ്പോൾ ആളുടെ റിലേറ്റീവ്സ് ഒക്കെ വന്ന് വിസിറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. It was before the partition. Yeah. And now author is introducing the name Bishan Singh. His name was Bishan Singh. And now here we can see the author is going to give details about his family, about his daughter and all. His name was Bishan Singh, but people now called him Toba Singh. Though it was apparent that he was impervious to the passage of time, he was not affected. He was to the passage of time. He waited for the visits from his relatives. ഓരോ മാസവും അവർ വരുന്ന സമയം അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സമയം എങ്ങനെയാണ് പോകുന്നതെന്ന് ആൾക്ക് അറിയണ്ടായിരുന്നില്ല. or he was not affected by that, but he waited for the visits of their visits and was ready for them when they came. അത്രയും ഈഗർ ആയിട്ടാണ് റിലേറ്റീവ്സിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ആൾ നോക്കിയിരുന്നത് അല്ലേ. എത്ര ബോധമില്ല എന്ന് ഇൻസെയിൻ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ആൾക്കാരാന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാലും അവരുടെ തൊട്ടടുത്തുള്ള റിലേറ്റീവ്സിനെ അവർക്ക് തിരിച്ചറിയാനായിട്ട് പറ്റും. And before their arrival, he would tell the guard his visit was coming. He was happy and he tells the guard that his visit was coming. Relatives was coming, were coming. He bathed, kulichu, scrubbed his body with soap, oiled his hair and combed it, put on his best clothes, which he had reserved for this occasion. ആളുടെ മനസ്സിന് തന്നെ ഭയങ്കര സന്തോഷമായിരുന്നു. So he dressed up and then went to see his visitors, but he remained silent when they addressed him. He was happy to see the visitors, but he remained silent. Sometimes, however, he muttered this to his usual mutterings to his relatives too. Opir di gurgur di annex di bedania di mungdal di of Laltian. The nonsensical speech. Now, the author is introducing his daughter. He had a daughter who was grown up now. As a child, she cried whenever she saw her father because he was in a ghoulish appearance, his hair and beard glued together, and he seldom bathed. So, the daughter cried whenever she saw her father. And she continued to cry for him when she was a young woman. വലിയ പെൺകുട്ടി ആയപ്പോഴും അപ്പോഴാണ് അച്ഛൻ്റെ അവസ്ഥ എന്താണെന്ന് മനസ്സിലായിട്ടാണ് പിന്നെ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്ന സങ്കടം. When the partition disturbances began, Bishan Singh started asking the people at the asylum where Toba Tek Singh was. He was asking his inmates, where is my place? If it is Pakistan or if it is in India. And since he was unable to receive a satisfactory answer, his curiosity increased. Nobody knows the answer. His visits had also stopped. So he became more silent. ആളുടെ വിസിറ്റ്സും നിന്നു. പാർട്ടിഷ്യൻ്റെ സമയമായപ്പോഴേക്കും ആ ടേമോയിലിൻ്റെ ഇടയ്ക്ക് ആളുടെ റിലേറ്റീവ്സും ആളെ കാണാനായിട്ട് വരാണ്ടായി. സോ വാട്ട് ഡസ് ഇറ്റ് മീൻ? ആളുടെ റിലേറ്റീവ്സ് maybe they were transferred to India, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ it was the time his relatives were also transferred to India. He had been able to sense the impending visits of the relatives, but now it seemed the little voice in his heart that told him they were coming was stilled. That is, they are not coming. He longed for his visitors. He waited. He had been who had been sympathetic and had brought him gifts of fruits, sweets and clothing. Alde visitors, relatives asylum kondakiyengalum they loved him, who was sympathetic towards him, brought him gifts, and he was convinced they would be able to tell him if Toba Tek Singh was in Pakistan or in India. He knew his relatives would tell him where his place was, and his conviction stemming from his belief that his family came from Toba Tek Singh. So the Bishan Singh believed that his family who came from Toba Tek Singh will clear his doubts whether Toba Tek Singh belongs to Pakistan or India. In the lunatic asylum, there was a man who believed that he was God. Bishan Singh asked him about Toba Tek Singh. The man laughed raucously, making loud noise. It is neither in Pakistan nor in Hindustan, he said, because I haven't given any orders yet. Bishan Singh pleaded with his God to give the order so that the question of Toba Tek Singh could be settled once and for all. That is mad conversations between the insane people. The man said that he was too busy, that there were too many other orders to be taken care of. He cannot just settle the issue of Toba Tek Singh now, to give the order of Toba Tek Singh now, because he was too busy. The mad conversational exchanges between the inmates. Finally, Bishan Singh lost his temper. Opar di, gurgur di, beidaniya di, mung di, dal di of Wafai Guruji, the Khalsa and Wahai Guruji, the Fateh. The nonsensical mutterings, the gibberish, his usual gibberish. He probably wanted to say that if the man had been a Sikh god instead of a Muslim god, he might have helped Bishan Singh. Now it is the commentary of the author. Bishan Singh wanted to say that if the man had been a Sikh god, the man was a Muslim god. Sikh god ആയിരുന്നെങ്കിൽ ഈ ഒരു കാര്യത്തിന് പെട്ടെന്ന് തീരുമാനം ആക്കിയേനെ and would have helped Bishan Singh. A few days prior to the transfer, Bishan Singh was visited by an old Muslim friend. Another person came to visit him, a Muslim friend. Seeing him, Bishan Singh turned to leave. The guard restrained him. He doesn't want to talk to that friend, but the guard restrained him. He has come to see you, the guard said. This is your friend, Fazluddin. Bishan Singh glanced at his friend briefly, then began muttering his customary nonsense. Opar di, gurgur di, beidaniya di, mung di dal di of Wafai Guruji, the Khalsa and Wahai Guruji, the Fateh. His usual gibberish talks. Faisal then came forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. So they knew each other before, right? So doesn't need an introduction. He just came forward and placed a hand on his shoulders. So Fazluddin is introduced here. And why did he came here? Why did he come here? We'll see it. I wanted to come and see you earlier. I've just been so busy. I was busy earlier. Your family has left for Hindustan. Your family left for Hindustan. And everyone is fine. I helped them in whatever way I could. Your daughter Roop Kapoor, you remember your daughter Roop Kapoor? He paused in mid-sentence. Roop Kapoor? Bishan Singh looked thoughtful. Yeah, he remembers now. Yes, she's fine too. Roop Kapoor, she's fine. She also left with the others. So his family left to India as sick persons. They need to leave Pakistan to India. So what does that mean? Toba Singh in Pakistan. Heartbreaking, right? Bishan Singh remained silent. They requested me to check on you every once in a while, Fazal then continued. The relatives had requested him to check on Bishan Singh, and he came and inquired. Now I hear you're being taken to Hindustan. Fazal then, he would be staying in Pakistan itself, his own country, his own place. But the relatives of Bishan Singh and Bishan Singh need to be transferred to Hindustan. And give my regards to Bhai Balbir Singh and Bhai Vadwa Singh, relatives, and sister Amrit Kaur. Fazal then is speaking about his relatives, Bishan Singh's relatives. Give my regards to them. Tell Balbir I'm all right. I'm all right in Pakistan. One of the two cows he left behind his calf had two calves. What is this significant? What does this say? പാർട്ടീഷൻ്റെ സമയത്ത് ഓരോരുത്തരും വേറെ രാജ്യത്ത് പോയപ്പോൾ ദാറ്റ് മീൻസ് മുസ്ലിംസ് പാകിസ്ഥാനിലോട്ട് പോയപ്പോഴും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പാകിസ്ഥാനിലുള്ള ഹിന്ദുസ് ഇന്ത്യയിലോട്ട് വന്നപ്പോഴും അവർ എല്ലാ ഇപ്പോൾ വീട് കൊണ്ടുപോകാൻ പറ്റുമോ? പറ്റില്ല. അവരുടെ കന്നുകാലികളെ മുഴുവൻ കൊണ്ടുപോകാൻ പറ്റുമോ? പറ്റില്ല. അവരെ കൊണ്ട് പറ്റണ പോലെ അവരുടെ സാധനങ്ങളും ആൾക്കാരുമായിട്ടാണ് അവർ പോയിക്കൊണ്ടിരുന്നത്. ഒരുപാട് ഇപ്പോൾ ഫാമൊക്കെ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്ന ആൾക്കാരുണ്ടാവാം. അത് മുഴുവൻ എല്ലാ കന്നുകാലികളെയും കൊണ്ടുപോകാൻ പറ്റുമോ? പറ്റില്ല. അവർക്ക് അവരുടേതായ റെസ്ട്രിക്ഷൻസ് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു കാണും. അപ്പോൾ ഇവർ പറയുന്നത് ഒരു ഫാമിലിയുടെ കാര്യമാണ്. അപ്പോൾ അവരുടെ പശുവിനെയൊക്കെ അവരവിടെ വിട്ടിട്ടാണ് പോയത്. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ എന്തോരം വാല്യുബിൾ ആയിട്ടുള്ള പൊസിഷൻസ് ആയിരിക്കും അവർ ഓരോ ആൾക്കാരും ആ പാർട്ടിഷൻ്റെ സമയത്ത് ഒരുപാട് ആൾക്കാരെയാണ് എഫക്റ്റ് ചെയ്തത്. മില്യൺസ് ഓഫ് ആൾക്കാരെയാണ് എഫക്റ്റ് ചെയ്തത്. അവരുടെ ഓരോ സാധനങ്ങളും അവർക്ക് വിലപ്പെട്ട ഓരോ കാര്യങ്ങളും അവർ അവരുടെ സ്ഥലത്ത് വിട്ടിട്ടാണ് ഇന്ത്യയിലേക്കെങ്കിൽ ഇന്ത്യയിൽ പോയത്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പാകിസ്ഥാനിലേക്കെങ്കിൽ പാകിസ്ഥാനിൽ പോയത്. And one died 6 days after the birth. And if there is anything more I can do, tell them I'm ready anytime. So actually country is getting divided into India and Pakistan, Muslims for Pakistan and Hindus for India. But actually the people are really close to each other. ആൾക്കാരനെ അവർക്ക് ഹിന്ദുസ് എന്നും മുസ്ലിംസ് എന്നും തരം തിരിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ടെങ്കിലും love is always there. Love is intact in between the people. And here I brought you some sweets. Taking the bag of sweets from him, Bishan Singh handed it to the guard who was standing nearby. Bishan Singh gave the sweet box to the guard. He then asked Fazal then, where is Toba Singh? Fazal then repeated in amazement, where is Toba Singh? Where it was before? Mumbai evideyirunnu? Bishan Singh asked, is it in Pakistan or in Hindustan? In Hindustan? Well, no, in Pakistan I think. Fazal then became flustered. He is also a bit confused about that thing now, whether it is in Pakistan or whether it is in India. Bishan Singh was muttering again his nonsensical verse. See, many times this muttering's been repeated in the text, right? So it again emphasized on the lack of clarity of decisions from the bureaucratic decisions or mad decisions by the government itself. Upar di gurgur di annex di beidaniya di mung di dal di of Pakistan and Hindustan of the dur fitay moon. And with that he walked away. All preparations, so here it comes Fasaldan's exit. Now again, all preparations for the transfer had been completed. Now it's the day of transfer. List of patients had been exchanged and the day of the transfer had been set. The officials decided the day of transfer. On an extremely cold day, lorries filled with Hindu and Sikh lunatics left the asylum in Lahore and accompanied by the police and some higher officials. Lorries were filled with Hindu and Sikh lunatics because Toba Tek Singh it would be in Pakistan. അപ്പോൾ അവിടെയുള്ള ഹിന്ദുസിനും സിഖ്സിനും ഇന്ത്യയിലോട്ട് പോകണം. This asylum in Lahore. So on an extreme cold day, lorries filled with Hindu and Sikh lunatics, accompanied by the police and some higher officials, they left to India. And at Wagah border, the superintendents from both sides met. And after the initial formalities were out of the way, the actual transfer began, continuing all night and a cold night. All transferring of the inmates between India and Pakistan began. Getting the lunatics out of the lorries and handing them over to the Indian officials proved to be an arduous task. It was a difficult task, handing over the lunatics to the Indian officials. Many of them refused to leave the lorries, and those who did ran about wildly, making it difficult for the guards and other officials to keep them under control. It was a situation of Bedlam, a confused state, really difficult state. Those who were naked tore off any clothing that was forced on them. The people were just running nakedly, and they tore off their clothes, which was forced on them. Many swore and cursed. One or two sang, some fought with each other. That is, they were in a confused state. They were creating a lot of troubles there to the officials there. They couldn't actually control the inmates of the lunatic asylum at the day of transfer. Some fought with each other and others cried or wailed. Confusion was rampant. It was pure Bedlam. It was really a confused state, a noisy state. The women were also a problem. And the cold weather made everyone's teeth chatter. They were just talking informally about unimportant things, revealing their madness. And most of the lunatics were not in favor of the transfer because they couldn't comprehend the reasons for being uprooted from one place and thrown into another. They couldn't know why they were being uprooted, why they were being transferred from one place to another. They don't favor this transfer. One or two people, not completely mad, means they are sane people. Remember, certain sane people were there in the asylum, the murderers, like that. Certain people shouted, Pakistan Zindabad, and certain other people shouted, Pakistan Murdabad. And this infuriated both the Muslims and Sikhs. So both Muslims and Sikhs got annoyed, got angry by this. And altercations between them were avoided with great difficulty. And arguments, the noisy arguments or like this, were avoided by the officials with great difficulty. So once arguments start, then it would end in blood spill. When Bishan Singh's turn came to cross the border, now Bishan Singh's turn to cross the border from Pakistan to India, he asked the official who was entering his name in a register, where is Toba Tek Singh, in India or in Pakistan? The official laughed and said, ha ha ha, in Pakistan. On hearing this, Bishan Singh leaped back and ran towards the remaining group of men who waited their turn. The Pakistani soldiers caught him and tried to force him back to the checkpoint. He resisted vigorously. He wants to go back to Pakistan when he heard Toba Tek Singh, his land is in Pakistan. But the Pakistani soldiers brought him back with force to the checkpoint, to the borderline. They brought him back. But he resisted. Toba Tek Singh is here. My place is there. He yelled. My place is there in Pakistan. Let me go there. Opardi Gargardi and Exdi Beidhania Di Mongdaldi of Toba Tek Singh in Pakistan. he started his usual gibberish, his nonsensical talk. The authorities attempt to reason with him. They try to pacify him. Look, Toba Singh is in Hindustan now. You just come here. It is in Hindustan. And if he's not there yet, we will send him there immediately. And actually, the authorities are speaking about a person, Toba Singh. If he's not there in Hindustan, we will send him. We will send Toba Singh there immediately. But he was adamant. Bishan Singh was adamant and wouldn't move from the spot where he stood. He didn't move from that spot in the checkpoint from where he stood. When the guards threatened to use force, he installed himself in a place between the borders and stood there as if no power in the world could move him. He just stood there. He just stood. They couldn't move himself. But he was a harmless man and he was allowed to remain there while the transfer continued. അവർക്കറിയാം അവിടെ അസൈലത്തിലെ ഒഫീഷ്യൽസും അവിടെ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു ആൻഡ് ദേ ന്യൂ ആള് ഉപദ്രവിക്കാത്ത മറ്റുള്ളവർ ഉപദ്രവിക്കാത്ത ആള് ആണ് സോ ലെറ്റ് ഹിം സ്റ്റാൻഡ് ദേർ ഫോർ സം മോർ ടൈം. അപ്പോൾ അവർ ബാക്കിയുള്ള ഇൻമേറ്റ്സിൻ്റെ ഒക്കെ ട്രാൻസ്ഫർ കഴിയാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് വെയിറ്റ് ചെയ്തു. ബിഫോർ ദ സൺ റോസ് എ പിയേഴ്സിംഗ് ക്രൈ arose from Bishan Singh. He cried, who had been quiet and still all this time. ഇത്രയും നേരം ക്വയറ്റ് ആയിട്ട് നിന്നിരുന്ന ആള് just started crying. Several officers and the guards ran towards him. They saw that the man who had stood on his legs day and night for 15 years now lay on the ground prostrate. നമ്മൾ പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്നില്ലേ നേരത്തെ, he has not slept, he has not he didn't take any rest or he didn't sleep for 15 years or he was just standing. So who had stood on his legs day and night for 15 years now lay on the ground. He died. Beyond a wired fence on one side of him was Hindustan, ഒരു ഭാഗത്ത് ഹിന്ദുസ്ഥാനും, and beyond a wired fence on the other side was Pakistan, ഒരു ഭാഗത്ത് പാകിസ്ഥാനും, and in the middle on a stretch of land that had no name lay Toba Singh. So now we will move on to certain other important facts that regarding the theme. You can see the confusion inside the asylum, the identity crisis of these persons, the change of their place and the separation between the inmates and separating themselves from their own place to another place. You can see all these things as the themes of Toba Singh. And you can see the madness that has gripped the subcontinent, madness that has gripped India and Pakistan, permeates even the lunatic asylums, as we have already discussed. The people in the lunatic asylums were also needed to be transferred to their respective places. The story revolves around Bishan Singh, the major character, that was a sick inmate of an asylum in Lahore and who is from the town of Toba Singh. Then you have to remember the fact that the asylum is situated in Lahore. The story is set in Lahore, and that in Lahore there were Hindus, Muslims and Sikh patients. They were all living there, and from there Hindus and Sikhs were transferred to India, and Muslim lunatics were allowed to stay in Lahore itself. And Manto also uses the madness of the asylum as a symbol for the madness that wreaks havoc in the nation at the time of partition. Madness he has used as a symbol. This madness actually stands for the madness that created a lot of destruction and havoc in the nation itself at the time of partition. People were doing all the mad acts then. Killing other people, it is a mad act. And killing in the name of religion is a mad act. And in an ironic manner, the mad people are seen as sane people than the sane people outside the asylum. And their reason, or they think, they decided to brutally divide a nation into two, creating bloodshed. They divided the nation into two. Actually, who is sane and who is insane? The sane people who are living outside the world, who are living outside the asylum, are also insane. Maybe the people living inside the lunatic asylums are more sane, right? Then madness as a metaphor here stands for communalism, Vargiyada. What is that? It is the love towards one's own religion rather than to the wider society, the tolerance towards, they cannot tolerate other religion, and allegiance towards one's own religion rather than to wider society. Don't be like that. Like communalism, never support communalism. And madness is also stands for religious fanaticism, religious, more passion towards the religion. Madness is also a metaphor for that, more passion towards one's own religion. Don't be a religious fanatic too. The nationalistic love springs from religious partiality. വലിയ നാഷണലിസ്റ്റിക് ആയിട്ടുള്ള രീതിയിലുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ എടുക്കുമ്പോഴും that is also springs from religious partiality. There is a religious partiality there at the time, uh, at the time of partition. ഇന്ത്യൻസ് ഹിന്ദുസ്ഥാൻ, വി ഇന്ത്യൻസ് എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ ഹിന്ദുസിനെ സപ്പോർട്ട് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ള രീതിയിലും, ആൻഡ് പാകിസ്ഥാനീസ്, വി ആർ പാകിസ്ഥാനീസ് എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ മുസ്ലിം മെജോറിറ്റീനെ സപ്പോർട്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നുള്ള രീതിയിലുമാണ് ആ ഒരു നാഷണലിസം വരുന്നത്. ഇറ്റ് സ്പ്രിങ്സ് ഫ്രം റിലീജിയസ് പാർഷ്യാലിറ്റി. ആൻഡ് please by heart the terms that author has used here. Rigmarole, that is a confused state. Bedlam, again a time of rigmarole, a meaningless state. um, and bedlam is another noisy, confused state. Gibberish, that is again meaningless. He എപ്പോഴാണ് ഓഥർ ഇത് യൂസ് ചെയ്തത്? when he was speaking about the nonsensical phrase of Bishan Singh. He has used all these words. And madness and chaos are the metaphors he has used. Madness for the madness of the people outside the asylum who were supporting the partition, and the confusion also. And he, our author, never took a political stand on partition. He was not saying partition is required or not. He is not taking a stand there. And he never became judgmental in partition. He didn't. He didn't become judgmental, but he was affected by partition. He was in Bombay, and he was after partition he went to Lahore, and he was also affected by partition. And I hope all of you have understood what Toba taxing is. Please go through the questions, and we will meet with yet another session of Zeitgeist in the next class. Thank you. Bye bye.